Joining us to talk more about the African Union Summit is Edwin Ikoria, who's the Transparency Manager One campaign. Thanks for joining us on the program. Now, this is the 30th session of the African leaders. What's the focus of this year's gathering apart from the fight against corruption?
Okay, the fight against corruption is a major theme. But beyond that, of course, you heard President Kagame launch the single aviation market for Africa. And then, of course, there were other review of some of the commitments that African governments have made, like there was a CADP, the biennial review, and the scorecards was also reviewed. There were several things that happened. But more importantly is the launch of the theme of the year, which is winning the fight against corruption. And of course, the change of baton, President Kagame becoming the chairperson of the African Union, and all of that. So it's quite significant, what took place in Addis Ababa.
Now, talking about winning the fight against corruption here, do you think that Africa is indeed winning the fight against corruption? Okay,
let us start by saying that it is a conversation starter. The fact that the African Union Commission agreed, or the African heads of state agreed to have a theme that is winning the fight against corruption, it's already progress in itself, because it's an admission that something is terribly wrong. Especially when in the later part of last year and early this year, as we've seen a lot of the opening of the slave markets in Libya, and all of those huge number of students, of young people that are leaving the continent, running to Europe, out of desperation. When some of them were interviewed, they just tell you that I would rather die in the sea than go back home. This called for a lot of reflection on the part of African leaders to say things cannot continue the way they are. And once they have identified that corruption is a major driver for these, social inequalities, for all of these hopelessness that we see on the continent, they just know that they must do something right now. And I think that is why the fact that they agreed and then decide to put a whole team on corruption, it's already progress in the right direction. And for us, that is already a great starter. And it is now it's just left for us to see what the specific plans will be in terms of fighting against corruption, knowing that corruption always fights back. Now, let's talk more about the launch of the single African air transport market. Can you tell us the benefits that this will bring to Africa? Okay, first of all, let me explain something to you. There was a time I was trying to go to Niger. And for me to go to Niger, which is just on top of Nigeria, geographically, I had to fly first to Lagos from Abuja. I went to Togo, to Benin Republic. Then I joined Cote d'Ivoire before they went back through Bamako before I landed in Niamey. That is the situation with the African air transport system. So that alone shows that there's a lot of breaking. There's a lot of fragmentation in the market. So what this did for Africa, what it's going to do for Africa is that seeing Africa as a single market for the 23 countries that have signed on to it at the time now, it makes them see it as one airspace. It means airlines can fly in from one country to another without having all of these international bottlenecks that must happen. In itself, a study that was done earlier had shown that about 155,000 new jobs will be created and fares will go down. That is the most important part. You must understand this statistic. Africa has about 15% of the world population, but just know that it's only 3% of air traffic that is found in Africa. So this just shows that a lot of people that could have been flying are not flying because it is too expensive. But when the market is open and the market is big, and bigger other players get into the picture, the fares are expected to drop. And that will increase the number of people who can fly. So flying will no longer be a luxury means of travel. It can now be a regular means of travel. This is what we expect to see, with the launch of the single aviation market. Now, apart from this launch and, of course, some of the leaders talking about their commitments and some even giving their scorecard, what other issues, talking about some of the challenges facing the African continent, have these leaders talked about some of these issues? Okay, I think the first thing is the fact that President Kagame had said something very profound, and that is the fact that if Africans can unite, if we act and work as a single bloc, that can send a signal That for me is a major output from this summit. The reason why this is important is that right now that we don't even trade with ourselves. So one of the things that came up is that in the course of the year, there will be the Continental Free Trade Agreement that is supposed to go into force. And if that happens, it means, or it is expected that we begin to trade within ourselves, which is supposed to induce interconnectivity, is supposed to induce, regional infrastructure. That itself is supposed to be another boost. But beyond that, again, the chair of the African Union Commission, who has, responded very heavily on President Trump's remark about, calling Africa shithole, that also came up, and you could see that it said we cannot continue to be the weak, the people that they abuse continuously. We need to do something right now, and that for me is a renewal of a zeal, of a new energy on the continent, that we cannot let things go the way they are, and that covered many of the things that went on. The other key output that we thought was was very significant is the issue of financing of the AU. As part of the AU reforms, President Kagame and his team had suggested the 0.2% for all African countries. That has not gone as well as we would have expected. They are currently having the final closing session. We are yet to see what the final decision will be. If all of the countries will agree on the 0.2% import levy on all goods, to be used to finance the African Union Commission. And again, that was a major part. But the big countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt have been querying that, and they are not really fully on board with that idea yet. But by the time they come out of the final closing session, we would see what the final decision is.
Transparency Manager, One Campaign, Edwin Ikoria, thanks for speaking to us in Network Africa. Still to come on the program, South African band Ladysmith Black Mambazo wins Grammy. You stay with us.